Daniel had never been the kind of man who believed in fate. At 27, he was practical, grounded, someone who trusted routines more than serendipity. He had his work, his gym, his weekend gatherings with a small circle of friends, and that was enough. Or at least that was what he told himself when loneliness crept in late at night, echoing inside his apartment walls. It was early spring, the air still cool but carrying the promise of warmth, when Daniel's life tilted unexpectedly. He had agreed to help his colleague with a charity book drive at the local community center, something he didn't usually volunteer for. He was the kind of man who preferred the background, stacking shelves, or handling logistics, not mingling with strangers. But that Saturday morning, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with second-hand novels, he caught himself scanning the room. And then he saw her. She wasn't dazzling in an obvious way. Not the kind of woman who walked into a room and drew every stare with a loud dress or booming laughter. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet magnetism. Her hair, dark and slightly curled at the ends, brushed her shoulders when she leaned over to unpack books. She wore a fitted white blouse tucked into high-waisted jeans, nothing extravagant, but somehow it looked as though it was designed just for her. What caught Daniel first, though, was her expression. Concentrated, slightly amused, lips curving when she muttered something to herself about mislabeled boxes. It was that mix of seriousness and playfulness that pulled him in before he even realized he was staring. She noticed him. Their eyes met for a second too long, and Daniel, unprepared, gave a short awkward nod. To his surprise, she smiled, not a polite, distracted smile, but something warmer. "First time volunteering here?" she asked. Her voice was light, playful, carrying a softness that made it impossible to ignore. Daniel cleared his throat, suddenly aware that his shirt sleeves were rolled up unevenly. "Yeah. A friend dragged me in. I'm more of the heavy lifting type than the organizing type." "Perfect," she said, pushing a box toward him with the tip of her sneaker. "Then this one's all yours." Daniel chuckled and bent down, lifting the surprisingly heavy box. "What's in this?" "Encyclopedias from the 70s. She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Romance novels. The dramatic kind. If you open it, you'll probably drown in tragic love stories." "That explains the weight," he said. "Heartbreak must be heavier than I thought." Her laugh was genuine, and Daniel felt an unexpected rush of satisfaction at having made her smile. They worked side by side for the next hour. She introduced herself: Emily, a graduate student working on her thesis about contemporary literature. Daniel shared that he worked in IT, a job he described as fixing problems no one sees until everything breaks. She teased him about being the unsung hero of office life, and he teased her about living surrounded by books and footnotes. The conversation flowed easily, surprising Daniel. He wasn't usually quick with words around women, especially not ones who carried themselves with such quiet confidence. Yet with Emily, silences didn't feel heavy. Even when they worked without talking, the air between them felt charged. When the shift ended, the coordinator thanked everyone and started dismissing volunteers. People drifted out, chatting, some exchanging numbers. Daniel hesitated, uncertain whether to say more, when Emily turned to him. "Hey," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You want to grab a coffee? I know a place around the corner that's not overcrowded on weekends." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He had been the one preparing to build courage to ask, but she had beaten him to it. "Yeah, sure," he said, trying to sound casual though his pulse had spiked. The cafe she led him to was small, tucked between a flower shop and a used vinyl store. It smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the kind of place where people read poetry or typed on laptops for hours. Emily picked a corner table, ordering a cappuccino, while Daniel went for a black coffee. "So," she said once they sat down, folding her hands around a warm cup. "Do you always spend Saturdays hauling boxes of tragic romances?" "Not really," Daniel admitted. "Usually, my Saturdays are gym, laundry, and maybe watching a game." "Very glamorous." "Living the dream," she teased. "And you? Do you always spend Saturdays saving books from dusty storage rooms?" "More often than I'd like to admit," she said with a little shrug. "I'm writing my thesis, so I spend too much time in libraries and coffee shops." This was my way of pretending I have a social life. Her honesty disarmed him. She wasn't performing, wasn't trying to impress, she was just herself. They talked about music, about the last movie they'd seen, about awkward teenage phases. Daniel confessed he once dyed his hair blue in college, which made Emily laugh so hard she nearly spilled her drink. She admitted she had once written cringe-worthy fanfiction that she prayed no one would ever find. Somewhere in the middle of all that, Daniel realized something unsettling: he wanted this conversation not to end. As the afternoon stretched, the cafe slowly emptied. The sunlight shifted, painting Emily's face in a softer glow. Daniel found himself noticing details he hadn't before: the faint freckles across her nose, the way her lips curved when she listened intently, the way her fingers traced absent circles on the coffee cup. There was something magnetic about her, but it wasn't just physical. It was the way she made him feel seen, as if his words mattered. That was rare. When they finally stood to leave, Emily looked at him with a half-smile. "So, Daniel, am I going to see you again at the community center, or was today a one-time heroic appearance?" "That depends," he said, meeting her gaze. "Will you be there?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Smooth." "I'm serious," he said, smiling despite himself. Emily considered him for a second before replying. "Then yes. I'll be there next weekend. And maybe afterward we can try another cafe. Unless you're the kind who sticks to routines." Daniel felt something stir in him, a quiet thrill. Maybe I could be convinced to change them. That night, back in his apartment, Daniel lay awake longer than usual. He replayed their conversations, the way she laughed, the way she looked at him. He didn't usually get carried away by first meetings, but this felt different. He didn't know if it was the start of something meaningful or just a fleeting moment. All he knew was that he wanted to see her again. And beneath that certainty, a subtle tension lingered, something unspoken in the way her eyes had held his for a beat too long, the way her voice softened when she asked if they'd meet again. It wasn't just friendliness. There was a spark. And Daniel, practical as he was, found himself hoping it would grow into something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for a long time. The following Saturday, Daniel showed up at the community center earlier than he planned. He told himself it was just because traffic was lighter, but deep down he knew why. Emily. He spotted her almost immediately kneeling beside a stack of books, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. A few loose strands had escaped and framed her face in a way that made her look effortlessly beautiful. She wore a soft gray sweater tucked into a skirt, paired with black tights and ankle boots. Casual, but striking. She noticed him, and her face lit up with recognition. "Daniel," she called out, her smile widening. The simple sound of his name on her lips gave him more energy than his morning coffee. "You're early," she said as he approached. "Couldn't wait to lift more boxes of heartbreak," he replied. Her laugh came easily. "Good. I saved some of the heaviest ones just for you." They worked side by side again, but this time it felt different. Last week had been an introduction, this week felt like a continuation, as though they'd simply picked up where they left off. Daniel caught himself studying her movements, the way she bit her lip when reading labels, the way her fingers brushed against his when they passed books. Every small contact sent a quiet jolt through him, subtle but undeniable. At one point, Emily stumbled trying to lift 2 boxes at once. Daniel stepped forward instantly, steadying her by the waist. "You okay?" he asked. Her eyes met his, closer than before. For a second, neither moved. His hand lingered longer than necessary, her breath catching just slightly. Then she smiled, breaking the tension with a light tone. "Guess I should stick to tragic romances and leave the heavy lifting to you." Daniel forced himself to step back, but the imprint of her waist stayed on his palm, electric and distracting. When their shift ended, it was almost expected that they'd go somewhere together. Emily didn't even ask this time. She just tilted her head toward the door and said, "Coffee." But instead of the cafe from last time, she led him down a quiet street lined with small shops and apartments. They ended up at a tiny bakery with soft lighting and tables pressed close together. The scent of vanilla and warm bread wrapped around them like a blanket. Daniel ordered a croissant and black coffee, Emily went for a slice of berry tart. "I like this place," he said once they sat down. "Good," she replied. "It's one of my hideouts. I don't bring just anyone here." Daniel raised a brow. "So I should feel honored." "Maybe," she teased, cutting into her tart with delicate precision. "Don't let it get to your head." But he could see the warmth in her eyes. She wanted him to feel chosen, special. Their conversation stretched again, fluid and easy. Emily spoke about her thesis frustrations, how she sometimes doubted if she'd ever finish it, how the pressure to be brilliant weighed on her. Daniel, in turn, admitted he sometimes felt trapped in the routine of his IT job, invisible until something went wrong. "You know what your problem is?" Emily said, pointing her fork at him. "You underestimate how interesting you actually are." Daniel laughed softly. "Says the woman writing 100,000 words on literature." "I'm serious," she insisted. "You listen. Most people don't. You ask questions because you care about the answer. That's rare." Her words hit him deeper than expected. Compliments about his body, his work ethic, those he could brush off. But this? It felt personal. Real. He didn't know how to respond, so he just looked at her for a long moment. She didn't flinch. She held his gaze, steady, like she was daring him to see her in return. Something stirred between them, then an unspoken current. After they finished, Emily checked the time and sighed. "I should head back. I promised myself I'd write at least 2 pages today." Daniel paid before she could argue, brushing off her protest with a simple, "Next time." As they walked outside, the afternoon sun painted the street golden. Emily hesitated, then touched his arm lightly. "I had fun," she said. "Me too." She looked at him, her expression softer now. Then she did something unexpected. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. It wasn't dramatic, just a brief brush of lips against skin. But Daniel felt it all the way down to his chest. When she pulled back, her eyes lingered on his for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then she smiled mischievously. See you next week, hero. And just like that, she walked away, leaving him standing in the sunlight with a foolish grin he couldn't suppress. The following days were restless. Work felt longer than usual, gym sessions less satisfying. Every time Daniel tried to distract himself, his mind drifted back to Emily, her laugh, the feel of her waist under his hand, the ghost of her lips on his cheek. He told himself not to overthink. They'd only just met. But it was impossible not to anticipate Saturday, counting down the days like a teenager before a first date. When the weekend arrived, the routine repeated: boxes, books, teasing remarks. But the undercurrent had shifted. Their movements seemed tuned to each other, conversations more layered. At one point, Emily leaned closer to show him something in a book, her hair brushing his shoulder, her perfume faint but intoxicating. Daniel barely heard her words, he was too aware of her proximity. She noticed, of course. She always seemed to notice. Her eyes flicked to his lips for the briefest second before she returned to the book. After their shift, Emily didn't suggest coffee. Instead, she asked, "Do you want to walk?" They strolled through the park, the air crisp but pleasant. Leaves rustled overhead, children played in the distance, and yet the world felt narrowed to just the two of them. They sat eventually on a bench overlooking a pond. The surface shimmered with reflected light, ducks gliding lazily across. Emily leaned back, crossing her legs, her skirt sliding slightly up her thigh. Daniel noticed but forced himself not to stare. "You're quiet," she said, tilting her head toward him. "Just enjoying this," he admitted. Her smile was small but genuine. "Me too." A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged. Daniel felt the urge to reach for her hand, to bridge the space. But he hesitated, unsure if it was too soon. Emily solved the dilemma for him. She shifted closer, her hand brushing his on the bench, not moving away. Daniel turned, their faces now inches apart. For a second, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then Emily leaned in, not fully, not a kiss, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You're different from what I expected." Daniel's own voice came rougher than he intended. "Different how?" She gave a faint, mysterious smile. "In a way that makes me curious." The moment hung, fragile and electric. But before it tipped further, she leaned back, breaking the spell with a playful grin. "Come on," she said, standing. "I owe you ice cream for all those boxes you carried." That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about her closeness, the brush of her hand, the almost kiss, the way she left him on the edge of wanting more. It wasn't just attraction, though that was strong. It was the sense of something unfolding, slow but undeniable, like a story neither of them wanted to rush. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt anticipation, not for the weekend, not for distraction, but for someone. For her. Daniel didn't realize how much his week had begun to revolve around Emily until Friday night came, and he caught himself ironing a shirt he wouldn't normally care about. He laughed at himself but didn't stop. The thought of seeing her again in the morning was enough reason. When he arrived at the community center, she was already there, sorting through donations. She looked up as soon as he walked in, her eyes lighting up in that way that made the rest of the room blur. "You're late," she teased, though he was actually 5 minutes early. "Traffic," he lied smoothly, just to see her smirk. They worked as usual, though both knew the rhythm had changed. They no longer needed excuses to talk or brush hands. They found reasons, passing books back and forth slower than necessary, leaning closer than required. At one point, Daniel noticed a smudge of ink on Emily's cheek. Without thinking, he reached out with his thumb to wipe it away. The touch lingered, softer than it needed to be. Emily froze, her eyes locking onto his, lips parting slightly. Neither moved for a heartbeat. Then she smiled faintly, almost shyly, something unusual for her. "Thanks," she murmured. His hand dropped, but the air between them vibrated, charged with everything unspoken. When their shift ended, Emily suggested something different. "Do you want to come with me to the library?" "The library?" Daniel asked, raising a brow. She grinned. "Don't worry, I won't make you study. But there's a reading room with amazing windows. And I kind of like sharing it." Daniel agreed without hesitation. The library was old, with towering shelves and stained glass windows that threw colored light across the wooden floors. Emily led him upstairs to a quiet corner where long tables overlooked the street below. "This is where I hide when I need to think," she explained, settling into a chair. Daniel sat opposite her, taking in the way the sunlight softened her features. She opened her notebook, but instead of writing, she tapped her pen against the page, studying him. "What?" he asked, amused. "You look like you don't belong here," she said with a small smile. "Like you're too restless for silence." "Maybe I just need the right reason to sit still," he replied. Her gaze lingered, thoughtful, almost searching. "And am I that reason?" The question landed between them like a stone in water, sending ripples. Daniel's breath caught. He didn't answer right away, he just leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Yes." For a moment, Emily didn't look away. Then she closed her notebook slowly, as if sealing the moment. "Dangerous answer," she said softly, though her smile betrayed her. They spent the afternoon there, not reading much, not writing much. Instead, they traded stories, childhood embarrassments, secret dreams, fears they rarely admitted aloud. Daniel told her how he worried he was wasting his life behind screens, how he wanted more but didn't know what more meant. Emily confessed she sometimes felt like a fraud, drowning in books and theory, terrified of failing. Hearing her vulnerability stirred something protective in him. She wasn't just the confident, teasing woman he'd met, she was layered, fragile in ways she rarely showed. At one point, her hand slipped across the table, palm up, an invitation without words. Daniel placed his hand in hers. Their fingers interlaced naturally, as if they had always been meant to. They stayed like that for a long time, no need for conversation. Just silence, shared and intimate. Later, when they left the library, the sky was darkening. Emily walked beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally. "Do you want to come by my place?" she asked suddenly. Daniel blinked. He hadn't expected it, though the thought had haunted him for days. "I mean," Emily added quickly, "for dinner. I make a mean pasta. And you've earned it after all the heavy lifting." Daniel smiled, pulse quickening. "I'd like that." Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books, plants, and soft lighting. The kind of space that reflected her personality, thoughtful, lived in, subtly charming. She moved easily in the kitchen, tying her hair up as she cooked, humming under her breath. Daniel offered to help, but she waved him off, handing him a glass of wine instead. "Just keep me company," she said. He leaned against the counter, watching her. The domesticity of it struck him, not just the attraction, but the comfort. It felt natural, like slipping into a rhythm that had always existed between them. They ate at her small dining table, laughing over spilled sauce and clinking glasses. Conversation flowed, laced with teasing and softer undercurrents. Afterward, they moved to the couch with fresh glasses of wine. Emily tucked her legs beneath her, curling toward him. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I wasn't planning on meeting anyone new this year. I told myself I'd focus on finishing my thesis, no distractions." Daniel tilted his head. "And now?" She met his gaze, her voice quieter. "Now I'm distracted. And I don't mind it." The honesty in her tone unraveled something in him. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull back. Their eyes locked, and slowly, almost cautiously, Daniel leaned in. Emily met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question waiting for an answer. Her lips were warm, tasting faintly of wine. When she deepened the kiss, sliding closer, Daniel felt the world dissolve around them. Her hand pressed lightly against his chest, not pushing him away, just grounding him. He cupped her face, savoring the way she leaned into his touch. When they finally broke apart, Emily's breathing was uneven, her eyes searching his. "That was," she began, then trailed off, smiling faintly. "Yeah," Daniel said, unable to find better words. She laughed softly, pressing her forehead to his. "I should probably be responsible and send you home before this gets complicated." Daniel smiled, though his pulse still raced. "And do you want to?" Her silence spoke louder than words. He left eventually, though neither wanted to end the night. She walked him to the door, kissing him again, slower this time, lingering, as if memorizing the moment. When Daniel stepped into the cool night air, his chest felt both heavy and light. Heavy with longing, light with the certainty that something real was unfolding. He couldn't stop replaying the kiss, the feel of her against him, the unspoken promise in her eyes. This was no longer just curiosity. No longer just attraction. It was the beginning of something deeper. Something he wasn't sure he deserved but desperately wanted to hold on to. Daniel had convinced himself that things with Emily would unfold smoothly, that their easy rhythm was too natural to stumble. But life had a way of reminding him that no connection, no matter how magnetic, came without turbulence. It began 2 weeks after their first kiss. They had been seeing each other constantly: community center shifts, library afternoons, dinners at her apartment. Every time, their bond grew stronger, their touches more familiar, their kisses more insistent. The restraint they held onto was thin, stretched tight over desire neither wanted to fully unleash yet. And maybe it was that intensity that made the cracks inevitable. It started with something small. They were at Emily's apartment, curled on her couch, sharing takeout containers. Daniel mentioned casually that his friends had been teasing him about disappearing lately. "They think I've gone off the radar," he said with a laugh. Emily smirked. "Well, you kind of have." "True. But maybe I should bring you along next time. Introduce you." Her expression shifted, barely noticeable but sharp enough for Daniel to catch. "What?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "I just don't know if that's a good idea yet." "Why not?" She looked away, fiddling with her chopsticks. "It's just, we're still figuring this out, right? I don't want to rush into labels or whatever introducing me to your friends means." The air thickened. Daniel leaned back slightly, Processing. It doesn't have to mean anything serious. Just, they've noticed I'm happier. I wanted them to meet the reason. Emily's lips parted, as if to respond, but then she closed them, silence stretching. That was the first time Daniel felt a flicker of doubt. Over the next days, he noticed other things. Times when Emily seemed distracted, her gaze drifting somewhere he couldn't follow. Moments when she grew quiet after laughing, like a shadow passing through her thoughts. One evening at the library, Daniel finally asked, "Are you okay?" Emily forced a smile. "Of course. Why? You seem far away sometimes." She exhaled, resting her chin in her hand. "I just have a lot on my mind. My thesis, my family calling every other day asking what I'm doing with my life, and now," she trailed off, biting her lip. "Now what?" Daniel pressed gently. Her eyes flicked to his, vulnerable for a split second. "Now you. Us. This." Daniel frowned. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," she said quickly. "It's just unexpected. I didn't plan for this. And I don't always trust myself not to mess it up." The honesty stung more than he expected. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You don't have to figure everything out right now. We'll take it slow." She squeezed his hand but didn't look entirely convinced. That weekend, tension finally snapped. They had volunteered again, spent the afternoon sorting books, and ended up back at Emily's apartment. The air between them was heavier now, charged not just with desire but with unspoken frustration. Emily poured them wine, her movements sharper than usual. Daniel watched her, sensing the storm building. "Emily," he said softly. "Talk to me. What's going on?" She froze, back to him, then set the bottle down harder than necessary. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth," Daniel replied. She turned, arms crossed. "The truth is I like you. Too much. More than I should. And that scares me." Daniel blinked, thrown. "Why would that scare you?" "Because people leave, Daniel," she said, voice cracking slightly. "Because I've been here before thinking something was real, only to watch it fall apart. And I can't afford another distraction that ends the same way." The words hit him hard. He stood, crossing to her. "I'm not here to play games. I want this. I want you." Her eyes glistened, torn between hope and fear. "And what happens when you get tired of me? When you realize I'm just a mess of unfinished work and insecurities?" Daniel cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then I'll remind you that you're worth every bit of it." For a moment, silence. Then Emily kissed him harder than before, desperate, almost fierce. The kiss ignited something raw. They stumbled back toward the couch, hands tangled, breaths uneven. This wasn't the careful, restrained affection they'd shared before. This was hungry, edged with frustration and longing. Daniel's hand slid along her back, pulling her closer. Emily's fingers gripped his shirt, anchoring herself. Their lips parted only for hurried breaths before colliding again, more urgent. She broke away suddenly, pressing her forehead to his, eyes dark. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Then show me," he whispered. For a heartbeat, she hovered on the edge. Then she kissed him again, deeper, her body pressing against his. The world narrowed to heat, touch, and the sound of her soft gasp as his hand traced the line of her waist. They didn't cross the final line that night. But they came close enough to feel the edge of it, to taste what waited if they surrendered fully. When they finally stopped, breathless, Emily rested against him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "This is dangerous," she murmured. Daniel kissed her hair. "Maybe. But so worth it?" She didn't reply. But she didn't pull away either. In the days that followed, the tension lingered. They were closer now, yet fragile, like glass stretched thin. Every touch, every glance carried double meaning. Daniel knew they stood at a crossroads, either their bond would fracture under fear, or it would ignite into something undeniable. And though uncertainty gnawed at him, one thing remained clear. He wasn't walking away. The following week was different. Daniel felt it in the way Emily looked at him when he arrived at the community center, her eyes softer, searching, as though she was still replaying the night on the couch when they had nearly surrendered completely. He felt it in the pauses between their jokes, in the way her hand lingered on his arm just a second longer. The tension wasn't gone. If anything, it had sharpened, distilled into something undeniable. They worked through their volunteer shift with mechanical ease, both aware of the weight in the air. When it ended, Emily surprised him by saying, "Come over tonight." No excuses. Her tone left no room for argument. Daniel nodded, pulse quickening. "I'll bring wine." She smirked. "Good. You'll need it." Her apartment felt different that evening. Maybe it was him, projecting, but the air seemed warmer, the lighting dimmer. Emily wore a simple black dress, casual yet striking, paired with bare feet. She looked both elegant and disarming. "You clean up nice," Daniel said, handing her the wine. She arched a brow. "So do you. Come on." Dinner was simple pasta again, this time with laughter that felt like a release. But beneath the conversation, a current hummed, pulling tighter with every glance, every brush of fingers across the table. After they cleared the plates, Emily poured wine, then led him to the couch. She tucked her legs beneath her as always, but this time she was closer. Deliberately closer. For a moment, silence. Then she spoke, voice low. "I've been thinking a lot since last week." Daniel's chest tightened. "Yeah." She nodded, her eyes fixed on her glass. "About fear. About how I push people away before they can hurt me. And how, maybe I've been doing that with you." Daniel stayed quiet, giving her space. Emily finally looked up, her expression raw. "The truth is, I want this. I want you. And it terrifies me. But I don't want to let fear decide anymore." Her honesty hit him like a blow and a gift all at once. He set his glass aside, reaching for her hand. "Then don't. Let me in." Her breath caught. She squeezed his hand, then shifted closer until their faces were inches apart. This time, when they kissed, there was no hesitation. No pulling back. The kiss deepened quickly, urgent yet tender. Emily climbed into his lap, her fingers threading through his hair as if she couldn't get close enough. Daniel's hands gripped her waist, feeling the warmth of her body through the thin fabric of her dress. It wasn't rushed, though the hunger was there. It was deliberate, unwrapping the weeks of tension piece by piece. Emily pulled back slightly, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "Don't hold back." Daniel exhaled, every restraint breaking. Their kisses grew fiercer, their bodies moving instinctively together, every touch amplifying the fire between them. Clothes didn't scatter recklessly, they slipped away slowly, almost ceremonially, as though each layer shed was another barrier falling. They didn't just collide physically, they connected, fiercely, completely. The room filled with the sound of their breaths, the quiet gasp of skin against skin, the unspoken words that burned louder than any confession. For Daniel, it was more than desire. It was the culmination of every look, every laugh, every shared silence. For Emily, it was surrender, not just to him, but to trust, to letting herself be vulnerable again. After, they lay tangled on the couch, the world outside forgotten. Emily's head rested on his chest, her fingers tracing absent patterns against his skin. Daniel kissed the top of her hair, still breathless, still overwhelmed. "You know," he murmured, "this feels like more than just distraction." Emily chuckled softly, though her voice trembled with emotion. "You're not supposed to say cheesy things right after." "I'm serious," Daniel said, lifting her chin gently so she met his gaze. "This isn't casual for me. Not anymore." Her eyes softened, shimmering. "Me neither." They kissed again, slower this time, not fire but warmth. The following weeks unfolded differently. They still volunteered, still traded jokes and worked side by side. But now there was no pretending. They arrived together, left together, and the others noticed, smiling knowingly. Daniel met some of Emily's friends reluctantly at first, then with growing comfort. Emily met his circle, too, laughing at their teasing, disarming them with ease. The balance wasn't always perfect. Emily still had moments of doubt, still fought with her own insecurities. Daniel still struggled with letting her see the softer parts of him. But instead of retreating, they leaned into each other. The spark that had started with a smile over cardboard boxes had grown into something steadier, something worth holding onto. One evening, weeks later, they returned to the park bench by the pond, the place of their almost kiss. The air was warmer now, spring tipping into summer. They sat side by side, shoulders touching, watching the water ripple. Emily reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. "Do you ever think about how random it was? That we ended up at the same place, same time?" Daniel smiled. "All the time. And I stopped trying to make sense of it. I'm just glad it happened." She leaned her head against his shoulder, quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "Me too." Daniel turned, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "So what now?" Emily looked up at him, her eyes steady, her smile gentle. "Now we keep going. Together. Wherever that leads." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, deeper than desire, stronger than fear. He kissed her, slow and sure, sealing the promise between them. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't wonder if fate was real. He just knew whatever had brought them together was worth believing in.